Are you looking to start your own podcast to generate more leads and more sales in your business? Now, do not start your podcast before doing this. Watch this video right now to learn exactly what it is that you want to do before you start your own podcast. For the best leadership tips, entrepreneurship advice, and subconscious success strategies to help you stand out fearlessly, build your empire, and crown yourself, make sure you hit the button and subscribe to this YouTube channel, and make sure you hit the button ding, 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 to get notified every Tuesday and Friday when a new video goes live. Hey there, I'm Kimberly Spencer, a high-performance coach and founder of crownyourself.com, helping visionary leaders and entrepreneurs stand out, sparkle, and achieve holistic success so that you can create a body, business, and life that rules. And having coached business leaders and entrepreneurs for the past 5 years, I have seen so many entrepreneurs and solopreneurs and new business owners in particular make this mistake in their business when they start their own podcast. Want to know what the mistake is? They start their own podcast. Now, to give you a little backstory on why this is such a big mistake, back in 2019, I started my podcast, The Princess and the Bee, and I loved doing it. The thing was that it took about 3 months for me to see that was a lot of work that I was putting in. I was putting in a lot of work outside of my zone of genius, meaning I was doing a lot of things that were in my zone of competence or my zone of excellence, but it was taking a lot of time for the production, the distribution, and the marketing. And by creating the podcast, my community, my existing community loved it, but it wasn't generating new leads and new sales. Because I made the mistake that so many entrepreneurs that I've worked with have made as well, is I started building the stage rather than building my audience. Think about it this way. If you were holding a live event where you could actually see people coming into a stage, into your audience, when you host a live event, and this used to be my lead form of lead generation, was live events. And so when you host your own live event, you are essentially building a stage. Well, that's exactly what you're doing when you build your own podcast. You're building the stage for you to share your story, your message, your tips and your tricks, and all of that. Problem is when you're just starting out in your business, or if you're not really yet doing 6 figures in your business, a lot of times you're building the stage without actually having anyone in the audience. And by a podcast being a virtual medium, and not every business owner is trained in being a data-driven entrepreneur, meaning you're looking at the data, you're looking at the metrics of how many people are actually listening to your podcast. Sometimes you start podcasting and you're ending up burning yourself out, doing all the editing, all the distribution, all the marketing, and you're doing all this work, but it's not actually generating people into your business. Why? Because you don't yet have the audience size. You don't yet have the audience to listen to your podcast. So to review, the 2 common mistakes that I've seen is podcasters start their own podcast and get caught up with all the doings of the podcast, which removes them from their zone of genius. And for another video on understanding what your zone of genius is, watch this video right here. So they're doing all the things themselves. And number 2 is they're building a podcast, but they haven't yet built the audience to come and watch them on their podcast or listen to them on their podcast. And so they're struggling with that podcast producing any new leads or revenue. But meanwhile, they're spending so much time in the content production, distribution, management, marketing, and all those systems that you have to put in place when you have your own podcast. So before you start your own podcast, we're going to flip the script to building your audience first. What I mean is, according to Apple Podcasts, there are now 2.3 million podcasts on Apple Podcasts. So how do you make your podcast, one in 2.3 million, stand out? The answer is you don't. Instead, you be the voice on all of them. Meaning, instead of starting your own podcast, start building your audience using other people's podcasts, other podcasts that are aligned in your niche, in your industry, or are potential strategic partners, by going on their podcast, you start to build an audience, meaning you're getting invited onto a podcaster's stage. You go onto their stage and they already have an audience from their business. The hard part really for a podcaster is creating the audience. The easy part is creating the stage. Most entrepreneurs start out creating the stage, and yet they don't know that they are speaking to an audience where no one's listening. So to give you an example, I've spoken on a lot of stages as a professional speaker over the years, and I've spoken on stages in front of thousands of people, and I've spoken on stages that could fit thousands of people, but only had a few people in the audience. And let me tell you, and I shared about this on one of my podcast episodes back in 2019, was I went to a convention back in 2019 in Houston, Texas, and I was supposed to speak on this stage, and it was a different audience that I typically speak on. So it was an audience more for anime and video games people, and I was using my husband's audience, which is anime and video games people, because he's a voice actor. I got the opportunity to speak at the same convention to do a Sunday personal development talk on how to heroify yourself. So how to build up those characteristics as a hero. So I got super excited because on a Sunday morning, not really a lot of people are awake at a anime convention because people have partied the night before. And so I was super excited to see a room half full when I got in and there was an act before me. Well, by the time that act finished, the act left the stage and so did the audience. And so there I was left speaking to an audience of 3 people. Now, as a professional speaker, I know that you still deliver the same speech as if you're speaking to, whether you're speaking to 3 people or you're speaking to 3,000. However, when you're doing this as a podcast, you don't see that there are only 3 people in your audience unless you're looking at the actual data of the downloads of your episodes. If the downloads of your episodes are showing that you have hundreds or thousands of listeners, then rock freaking on with your own podcast. However, if it's showing that you only have a few, maybe 10 or 20 listeners per episode, then that could be a sign that perhaps you need to take the time and build your audience instead of building the stage. So here are 3 ways to grow your audience so that you have people to show up to your stage of your podcast. Step number 1, guest on other people's podcasts. So like I said, when I shifted our strategy to looking at what could generate more leads in our business, check out this video to learn more about that. I shifted our strategy to be able to build the audience so we had more top of the funnel. What I found from looking at our podcast data, from the Princess and the Bee data, was that we were getting a lot of listens from our existing community. So my existing community was loving the connection, the depth of the stories and the insights and the knowledge that I was sharing on the Princess and the Bee, but they weren't turning into new leads. So I flipped the script in 2020 and started guesting more and creating less content for the Princess and the Bee. What that did was that generated $70,000 in new business revenue that then allowed me more time to spend on creating our own podcast and growing that because my business was bringing in more income and getting more leads and getting a bigger audience. Step number 2, build your social presence. Start building your social audience by connecting and creating content to build that audience and connecting with people in the DMs, in the PMs, and all the M's so that you start building those relationships and getting people interested in coming to your stage, the stage of your business. And lastly, and this is my other favorite one that is a time-old classic for business. Many of my clients and customers and students know that I do not believe on building your business on the back of somebody else's platform. While we do use social media and Facebook and YouTube and Apple Podcasts, those are all other people's platforms that we are blessed to be on. The one platform that you have complete agency over is your email list. So like I told my communication queens when they were asking when was the appropriate time to start their podcast, I said, if you have a large email list, that means you already have an audience who would be interested in listening to your own podcast. If you're just starting out in your business and you have a small list of under 1,000 people, then perhaps your time, energy, and effort would be better spent building your list, which you have complete agency over, and guesting on other people's podcasts in order to bring people into your list and into your community, into what I call your kingdom or queendom of your business. This way, you will have an audience who will not only listen to your podcast, but by doing your podcast, you're then building that know, like, and trust and connection factor with your community that you're building, which builds that know, like, and trust factor for them to eventually buy from you. Your products, your services, or the products and services that you end up recommending on your podcast. Now, if you like this video and you want to learn more about how to guest on other people's podcasts and build your business and your brand from other people's audiences, then definitely click down below and get your booty in on Communication Queens. Communication Queens is my signature 8-week group coaching program to guide you step by step through my 7-part framework to help you set up for podcast recording, show up without doing all the things that allows you to show up in your zone of genius, stand out, share your story, serve, sell, and eventually, when you're ready with an audience, start your own podcast. And if you already have your own podcast, have no fear. I will show you exactly how to use that as an asset inside of your business in Communication Queens. So click the link down below and get your booty on the wait list. And if you like this video, hit the like button, subscribe, and share it with your friends. As always, my fellow sovereigns, own your throne, mind your business, because your reign is now. Check out these videos next to learn how to profit from guest podcasting. Who decided to make an appearance on Mommy's show? Yeah, my golden?
Oh, he's like, no, Mama, hold on. I've got things to think of and poop to be had.
Mama's got 15 minutes before we gotta rock and roll and go into mom mode. Let's do it!